I want to welcome everybody. Today we're going to be continuing to talk about activity streams for change management. There's been a little bit of discussion in Slack. I don't know if everyone has been following that, but I did try to capture the notes from that in this document as comments. And so a question I have first, before we delve into the document, would folks like a high level overview of the activity streams? I jumped into it really deep since our last meeting, so I have a much better understanding of how the activity streams are structured and everything.
If it's not too much trouble, as the person who is way out of the loop right now, I wouldn't mind an overview if it wouldn't be too tedious for everyone else.
Yeah, I'll just do it. I'll do it quick because I don't think it takes a long time to go through it. I'm not going to do it from the spec perspective. I'm going to do it from the vocabulary perspective because I actually think that's easier to follow. So they have some core types that are defined, and the key ones that we're working with would be an object, which is pretty much everything inherits from object, and then also activity, and then the collections. Activity being that some action is happening, and we of course are taking actions. That's what the whole point of the change management documents are. And then collection is I don't want to just take one action. I want to take several actions. So I'm going to put them in a collection. And a collection is really just a collection of any kind of object. And they have ordered and unordered collections. So the next thing are the extended types, and they come in three categories: an activity type, an actor type, and object types. And the two that we're really interested in are the activity and actor type. And so activity type, this is what we're really extending. So you can see they have a create, a delete, and an update. And those are the ones that we are most closely aligned with. So we'll actually look at the example here. Actually, I'm going to jump to actor type, and then I'll come back to these examples because actor is another one of the core pieces. An actor can fall into several types of actors. I selected in the document I put together to use organization as the actor type. We could have used group or service. I think that in a lot of ways, that part doesn't really matter because the individual organization could select whichever one they think best fits. For an actor, though, you give it a name and a type. And you'll see in ours that I also include the URL for that particular authority. And what that would go to, I think, could be discussed. Is it most appropriate for it to go to documentation or to the main website? We can talk about that more. But as I said, I did with organization. So you'll see type organization, then the name of the provider, and then a URL. Other piece that I wanted to sort of focus in on is activity types. And so we'll look at create and just look at the create example. And you'll see that there's an actor for the create example. It's got a type of create, it has a little summary, and then it has what's being created. And this is the part that is most different when we look at the extension document. And then the only other piece to look at is really properties. And there's just a whole bunch of properties that can be defined. And what properties can be used on is like when you looked at the activity type itself, it will tell you what kinds of properties it expects to have. And so this structure of this document with these tables and these sections, I basically structured my document the same way because I thought for people familiar with activity streams, that would be the easiest way for them to follow. And then I'll do sort of a quick overview of this document to level set us, and then we can talk about specifics. Originally, I created a document that doesn't even closely resemble this because I didn't really know the standard very much, and I threw it together really quick in order to be able to talk about it in a presentation. The last time we met afterwards, I went back and I more aligned it with the way the specification is. And when I first did it, you'll see links to something called a maximal extensions. And that's where I just extended everything to be really specific to our space. And then I pared it back and came to this minimal extensions. And the idea here being, let's try and stay as close to the specification as we can and only extend in places where it just really doesn't fit. I'm open to hearing people suggest that we should do more extending, but I think it's easier to maintain something long-term if you go with less is more in that particular case. It just makes life easier long-term for maintenance. You'll see that I have the same kind of sections. The authoritative data core types, I didn't extend anything core, but I did note that we're using, in the way it's specified right now, we're using collection and ordered collection. And then I mentioned that the maximal one extended a couple of these, but we have the three types, the activity type, actor type, and object type. We're not doing anything with object types. So we have activity type and actor. I basically have an activity type proposed for every type of change that we have. The one thing that's missing from this is we have discussed teasing out a label change as being a special kind of update. And I didn't put it in the document at this point, but I figure we could sort of expand to that once we have the basics agreed upon. The sort of key piece that makes this create different than the create in the specification is that I added two properties. I added rdf-patch and sparql. You'll see that here is the rdf-patch type property, and here's the sparql. Oh, don't want to move it. And down here is the sparql property. Up here, you can see that example of the actor I was talking about, where it says the type is organization, it gives a URL to the authority, and it gives a name to the authority. And I just put a summary that says this is a new entity and for the term milk. And I did get feedback I was missing a date, so I've added the date to all of them. And that basically follows with a lot of these. Delete is basically the same. You've got what you're deleting, time, the actor, and then a patch that would apply the delete. Deprecated can come in two varieties. One that's very simple, where you're just adding triples to the original thing that's being deprecated. But you'll see that it extends ordered collection. And the reason I did that, so this is a single action to update an entity, but you could do the adding of the new into the replacement entity and the deprecation at the same time. So then there's a create entity happening and an update entity happening. And so there's two separate actions, and it's an ordered collection because they have to happen in order. You need to create it before you can reference it in the deprecation. So it needs to be there already. Update entity can be any kind of just update that occurs. In the example here, I am changing a label here from lowercase milk to uppercase milk, but it could be something a more complex update as well. Split, again, is an ordered collection because we're going to take multiple actions. We're going to create the new entities that are splitting off and then deprecate the other with an update entity. Merge is similar. You've got a couple that are going to we create the new entity that's going to be the replacement, and then we deprecate the other two. And again, that's an ordered collection. And that's the basics of it. So I will say that in the original one, I did an authority actor type. We could look at that real quick because someone had suggested that we should still have that. Just so you can see what that looks like. So it basically just extends object and it does the same thing. The only thing that's different is it actually says type is authority. So I don't know if it's worth it to have an extension just so you can say the type is authority, but I'll see what you guys think. As mentioned, we had the extension with the rdf-patch and sparql. I'm going to start here because there was several comments about rdf-patch and sparql in Slack. And the biggest one on sparql was that there was a concern that sparql is really powerful And so not in this example, but if we go up to the delete, you can see that it uses a wildcard in order to do the delete. So that potentially could delete a lot of stuff. And so there was some concern that sparql is very powerful and can have some unintended consequences. rdf-patch, on the other hand, it is written in such a way that you're going to specify every triple that has to be removed or changed or updated or added. It does it individually at the triple level. While we're on this topic, I want to say as well that it was suggested that perhaps we shouldn't be putting in the specific changes at all, and this should just be a notification service that says, hey, there was something deleted. And for anyone who, like, I think, Kevin, you were the one who suggested that. And I'd be real interested in hearing, if I get this delete entity message, how do I, or maybe an update is a better example here because delete is a little more straightforward, but if I get an update message, how do I know what the updates are if they're not in the package that comes through as part of the feed?
I guess you don't. In short, you wouldn't know. So to me, that would be a slightly different, how do I say this? So the short answer to your question is you wouldn't. I mean, all you know is that the resource has been updated. You don't know what exactly about it has been updated. To me, if you wanted to start advertising specifics about an update, you would want a separate activity stream or a way to advertise that, hey, this is a specific type of update. You know, like a label was updated, for example, or a relationship was added. But again, to me, it falls back to, like, that's how you would publish it as an activity via the stream versus the more generic, this thing was updated, if that makes sense.
So you would suggest that the stream would have just the URI and that it was updated.
I think that that's one way to advertise it. So for example, you know, what we have at ID right now is an Atom feed, and it will tell you what resource was created, updated, or deprecated. We cannot actually tell you what about that resource changed. We don't even know that ourselves. It could be as minor as a cataloger fixed a typo in a source node. But we have absolutely no idea what changed. All we can do is tell you that this resource is new, this resource is updated, and this one has been deprecated. And so to me, that extremely generic, general message, I mean, that's it. That's all we can tell you. So to me, if however we knew that, hey, this specific source node was replaced, to me, that would be an entirely different activity published via a stream. So in other words, it's still an update activity, but it's more specific than that. It's like source node change or something like that. And based on my reading of activity streams, and I think that this is probably going further than activity streams really meant to do, but at some point in my past, I did figure out a way one could model, you know, the addition of a relationship or the deletion of a specific triple in activity streams. But again, I think that that's probably using activity streams at a level that maybe it wasn't really intended, but I really don't know. I mean, it seems to make it possible. I can craft one of those examples. I mean, it was like add, and then inside of activity streams, you'll see that there's a relationship object, and you can actually specify the entire relationship or something like that. There it is. You see that relationship? You see properties relationship?
Yeah. So this, I don't
Like
know.
I said, there's actually a crazy way to model individual triples in an activity stream.
So in this particular case, would you see that this relationship property would be a link to something that has the more details about what has changed?
No, I think I'm looking at that right now, and that activity is literally the establishing of a relationship. So the subject is Sally, the relationship is an acquaintance of, and the object is John. So
right, in this specific, I mean, this is a specific example, but I think the relationship could be, well, I see what you're saying.
So the relationship could be
If
like
this would be
literally
the
any
entity-
property. Yeah.
correct.
Okay. So this
And
is just
to be clear about this, a relationship is a subtype of object.
yes.
So, like I said, this can get pretty self-referential after a while. Like I said, I think it's entirely possible, theoretically possible, to model something extraordinarily specific with activity streams in terms of changes. I'm just not 100% sure they really meant that to happen, but it's possible.
Yeah, so I was thinking, like, when you originally said that the stream is more like a notification, something has updated in the entity, and I was thinking you could use, so the problem with relationship is I think it's expected to have the subject be the thing that's being extended, and then the object being the thing that, the extension. So, but I'm sorry, I'm sort of stepping over this because I'm trying to think through it as we talk. And so what I was imagining was that you say, this is a notification, this thing has been updated, this is the URI, and then you have something like relationship or maybe some other property that points to an outside document that has the specific changes in it.
That could work. I don't know what that specific document would be, but I mean, it could be an rdf-patch document, I guess, a sparql query, could be a diff of some kind.
Yeah, because I guess on some level, from my perspective, and Dave, you can jump in just because you have more experience on trying to update the cache as you go. But the real power of doing something like this is to actually provide the changes and not just say, well, this thing updated. I guess, Dave, what would you do if you got a notification that said this thing updated? What would you do with that if you had no other information other than this updated?
Well, I think what we're getting into here is that there are at least a couple of different radically divergent use cases here. I mean, if you think about this more as a notification, like an alert on your screen, all it's doing is informing a consumer that they need to go look at the entity and do whatever they're going to do with it. Whereas what we're doing with it is attempting to do state management with it. And so the stuff that Kevin's talking about, I think the intent there, I suspect, is more along that awareness management as opposed to state management. So I would, if all I got was the notification for awareness, I would still have to figure out how I was going to pull the content that I needed. Now, I do recognize that Kevin, as a purveyor of said authority, may or may not know what the catalogers did with the underlying triples anyway. But I still don't think that invalidates the patch scheme as something that's useful for somebody like me. because the patch scheme is, from my perspective, is beautiful because I know exactly which triples I need to wrangle here by just analyzing the patch. And these patches are simple enough that they could basically allow you to keep a shadow triple store in sync in near real time if the patches were being emitted on a timely basis.
So is there another audience that would benefit from just getting the notifications? And what would they do with those notifications? How would they process that?
So my rationale for, the putting the notification foremost, and which is to say, might I add, that I in no way disagree with what Davis just said. I mean, if we can provide an RDF patch or a sequence of sparql queries that would help somebody, by all means. But the reason I said it first and foremost is just because with that basic information, the consumer can then decide what to do with it.
Yeah. So the use case, I mean, Lynette realized that this activity stream stuff is meant for all of RDF and all of the stuff that people are doing with linked data. So it could be something as trivial as just show me a list of recently modified contacts in my address book.
Can you say that again, David? Because Dave, I wasn't really sure how to.
Oh, so I mean, if it could be something as trivial as, well, I'm going to change my example. Somebody's updated their LinkedIn profile page, right? Just, oh, so-and-so's done something to their profile. Need to go check them out.
Right. That's definitely, I think, where the activity streams originated from.
Right.
And those use cases do make a lot of sense to me. And I guess on some level, I'm hoping to push the bounds of this because I do sort of feel like if you receive a change management document and it has the RDF patch in there and all you really wanted to know was know something changed, you just ignore the RDF patch. Yeah. And you just know it changed. And for the folks who are looking for label changes, if we had a label change type, then they could just watch that stream and only take an action when a label change type occurs and ignore pretty much everything else.
So I think maybe the way to think about this sort of generically is that the LinkedIn use case is activity stream as a alerting mechanism, whereas the patch scheme is activity stream as replication management, where what you're trying to do is maintain a shadow state of at least of a subset of the information base outboard from the owner of said resource, as opposed to just notifying somebody that the resource has actually been changed.
So are there any concerns about having the additional information about what has changed in the document?
Well, if it's there and you don't need it, you can obviously ignore it. And if you want it and it's not there, then you are forced to fall back to figuring out what you're going to do based upon having received the notification. So if the RDF patch is optional and it's not too verbose, then the folks who don't need it don't have a lot of extra byte transfer. And the folks that do need it know what to do.
What would count as too verbose? I'm just wondering, like some of the examples Lynette gave were like, especially the sparql examples, were things that were potentially like really huge changes.
Well, I'm just thinking about some of our context as we're doing the QA cache stuff. Some of those context subgraphs are measured in kilobytes, not bytes. And so if you're on the short end of a very narrow pipe. It could be the case that a big context graph or a big patch might actually create noticeable lag in processing, depending upon what the receiving platform is capable of.
Thanks.
Right?
Yeah, that last one seems like a good reason not to have it in there, and that maybe we specify what those extra steps would be, because then the main stream would be very fast, very small, basically giving you the type of change and the URIs involved. And that's very streamlined, very simple. And then having something like a relationship that would take you to another location that actually has the rdf-patch data. And that way, if it's something really large, you're only going to it if it's of interest to you.
Well, the other possibility is just to have an additional parameter on the request of terse or verbose. And the verbose gives you the patch and the terse doesn't.
So I will say there's nothing in the specification that does anything like that. That would be a major change to the specification. I am attempting at least to try and keep it close to how the specification currently is. So I don't know, Kevin, you're a little more familiar with the specification than I am. How would you feel about a property on the retrieve of the stream itself that impacts what gets returned with that stream?
You mean like an RDF patch property?
It would be on the request, right? Because you would have to know in advance.
Oh, I see what you're
that
saying. You're right. In other words, I request you give me the RDF patch data.
Yeah. So it'd be a verbose versus simple kind of parameter on the request, such that if you said verbose, then you would get all the RDF patch stuff, and if you don't, you would just get the notifications.
Yeah, no, I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, we would ultimately couch it as a profile, I guess, or something like that. It would be a part of a accept header with a profile request or something like that. They exist in the FC repo, the Fedora spec, and they exist in LDP, and JSON LD supports it for depending on which serialization. So it's a known concept out there. But yeah, I have no problem with that. Anyway, while I'm unmuted, I dropped that link into the chat, the Zoom chat, only for the simple purpose to add to what Dave was saying based on Christine's question about like what could a how verbose could an RDF patch be? Insofar as RDF patch either enumerates every single triple, and imagine just a flat out update. You delete everything, create everything. So, some of these resources could get pretty big, and that would be part of the package. And that's a lot of serialization for an activity stream, potentially.
Yep, that's an excellent example of what I was worried about.
So from a processing perspective, Dave, what would it be like if the activity stream was just notifications and there was a relationship URL? And so for each one, to get the patch for that particular change, you would have to follow another URL to get the actual change.
I personally like that idea.
Yeah. From a processing perspective, I don't see it as being a big deal, because the volume we're talking about, doing a double handshake, be able to accommodate the actual modification, just doesn't seem to be that big a deal. And actually, from that perspective, with Kevin's example, the consumers who are going to want to hit that second request aren't going to be sitting on narrow pipes. They're going to be like me, sitting on a big fat pipe. So the latency here is not going to be that huge. It's probably going to take them longer to construct the RDF patch than for me to consume it.
Yeah, I think I like this direction of doing it with 2 steps. as long as, you're telling me that that's not going to be a lot of overhead on your end, it seems like it reduces the overhead for the people who just want the notification and they can just process it. And then if you're only interested in a specific type of notification, then you're only going to follow that relationship URL and grab the patch because you're interested in that particular change.
Yeah, and one thing that I was thinking about here, and I can't remember what caused me to think about this, is that we're going to need to provide people what the authoritative patch sequence is, because I could see the order of patches being applied resulting in different outcomes.
So they do have the ordered collection, and I don't know, just from browsing through it, I don't know exactly how Getty has implemented their activity streams, but theirs is a little more complex than what I've explored so far, in that they have the ordered collection. They can point to the very first thing in that ordered collection, and they can point to the very last thing in that ordered collection. And so you can jump to the last thing and start reading backwards, or you can start at the front and read forward, but you can go to a specific date. I think their processing they suggested was go to the last one, start going backwards until you hit the date that's the last one you've taken a patch for, and then start reading forward and processing forward. So I think that's what they said their recommended thing was. That also gets into implementation. So like how you would specify it, I think is pretty straightforward, but how you would implement that isn't quite as clear to me. And I do hope that we can get into some of the implementation stuff before we get to the end, so that there's actual recommendations. If you wanted to do this, this is some infrastructure you could use. This is how you would structure the code, and how you would want to serve things up. And if you browse through the Getty stuff, they definitely jump around. So you drill through the URLs to end up at certain things. And so I need to dig into it a little bit more to understand in my own mind exactly how they've structured that and what implication that would have. This is from the simplest perspective right now of how do we even express the changes. How we organize them and get to them is one thing, and then how you, at the very bottom end, how do you actually specify what the change is? We're kind of at that end, working our way backwards, I think. But I guess I sort of wandered there a little bit to answer your specific question. As far as like the patch sequence goes, it's that ordered collection that provides that sequence.
No, I was thinking about it more on a macro level of patch to patch to patch. So I've got an entity and I modify it on July 1, and then I come back and modify it on August 1st. I can't necessarily just apply the August 1st patch and be up to date, because it could be the case that the July 1 patch did stuff that the August 1st patch is dependent upon.
So can you provide an example there?
Well, I guess I'm thinking about this mostly in the context of how patch is used to maintain source code. And that is, if I've got absolute line numbers that are referring to patches and I say, insert this line after line 23, if something else has modified the order so that line 23 is now line 25, I can't apply that patch because I'm applying it in the wrong place. I'm presuming, and I'm conjecturing here, but I'm presuming that a comparable problem will exist with predicates and label values, such, predicates and objects, such that there's a dependency there that you're saying, okay, unassert this from here, but if it's never been asserted that way, there's nothing there to unassert. It's actually in its initial state prior to the reassertion. So if I'm changing something from type A to type B to type C, if I'm applying it to type C, I'm assuming that it's there as type B, but it might still be type A.
So I guess I am operating from the assumption that you would apply the July one before you try to apply the August one.
But you got to know about it.
You got to know that the July one exists.
Yes, if you're looking at the August one.
So I guess I'm imagining that in like the way that I was describing the Getty, you come in and your change date, the last one you took was June 30th. And so you go to the end of the change stream, you back up until you hit a date, June 30th or earlier, and then you start processing forward from there. And you would get the July one. And then as you keep processing forward, you'd get the August one. And then you'd keep processing forward. So,
Yeah,
if you followed that, then you should be fine.
Yes.
But
It's
there
just-
is a potential to get out of sync. I could see that.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. There needs, and this isn't necessarily implicit in the activity stream specification for a particular change. It's sort of a meta notion of what are the changes and what is their required order to be applied. And the absolute timestamps are perfectly fine, I think, to accommodate that. Because if you're keeping track of what was the timestamp of the last change you did, if you go back in the provider's sequence, you'll eventually reach that timestamp, and you know that now you can run that forward from there through all the patches to be in proper sync. It's quasi implementation, but it's not, because it speaks to consistency and sort of integrity, if you will.
Hey Dave, I've got a question for you. As I sit here trying to work through this, knowing that you'd have to kind of replay all the changes from presumably the last time you updated your store, wouldn't you begin at the moment in time when you last patched? In other words,
Yes.
how would you encounter the August one before you encountered the July one, assuming for the sake of this discussion, the last time you ran the patch process was June 25th?
Well, I'm not presupposing how somebody comes in possession of a given patch. So if I somehow come into possession of the August 1st patch, I might think, oh, I need to update this because they came out with this. But I guess what I'm saying is there just needs to be some chain of patch history that you can check on to make sure that the patch you're in possession of is appropriate to apply at this point.
So wouldn't that be the main feed itself? So we were talking about the activity stream only being the notifications, and then you would take another step out to get the patch.
Yeah, I that's true. But if you've got your consumer of that stream turned off for some period of time, you've got a need to, when you light back up, appeal to the server and say, show me your history post this timestamp. So that there needs to be a way of running the server back in time.
I guess I'm not completely connecting, because in the process I was describing, you basically go to the end and then step backwards until you get to a date that is prior to the last time you took a patch. And then you just start stepping forward.
Yes. I mean, you're assuming that history is available, which is great. I'm just saying that history has to be available.
Okay. So that's what I consider the activity stream to be, is that history, and that it should have all the changes since the beginning of time. And that ordered collection that is the notifications would have everything that's ever changed. It would be the history of the changes.
And I guess all I'm attempting to assert here is that if this is a live true stream, if you're not monitoring that stream constantly, you can basically miss things coming down the pipe when you're not paying attention.
So you're thinking of it as the stream sort of drops things off.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're like on an RSS feed or an Atom feed, they only show you like the latest few things that have happened.
Exactly.
And anything older than that just doesn't get shown.
Right.
So I think the activity streams are a little different than that, because I think they are expected to have everything. At least that's the way Getty seems to have implemented it. I don't know, Kevin, what you guys are doing on your end with the activity streams you've been working on. Do you keep everything?
No. So when it comes to the resource level activity stream, so to speak, all we can tell you was when something was created or last updated. If it was updated 5 days in a row, we couldn't tell you that it was updated Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on Friday.
And is that because in the way you guys have activity stream right now, it's just notifications? You're not even trying to capture what the patch level information would be. And so from that perspective, the only thing that is important is that it's changed, because you're not tracking what changed anyway.
Correct. And that's for a host of reasons, such as we didn't know what to track. We have no mechanism in place to track it, so on and so forth. So that's for a host of reasons, but the assumption has always been wholesale replacement. So in other words, even though you didn't know it was updated Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, if you just wholesale replace the thing on Friday, you're good.
Yeah, I think the concept of wholesale replacement is challenging for a number of reasons that we talked about earlier. You know, about like, where are the edges of the graph? And, you know, if it's a record in a database, then wholesale replacement is pretty straightforward. But a linked data graph can be more complex. And so how do you know where those edges are?
Yeah. So an example of periodic wholesale replacement is NLM's Medline release. They do an annual baseline, and then everything from there is effectively a patch on top of that baseline. But you have to apply the successive release files in order, because they're modifying things as they go. But you have to do the wholesale replacement for the next year's baseline, because they release new records as part of the new baseline. So if you don't apply the fresh baseline, you miss new content. And that's just XML.
So 2 questions. One is there a concern with having to keep a history, a long running history? I think you could define it as like there's an annual history that restarts every year, so that if you're really old, you can go back and process last year's history. But if you are not that old, you could just process history of this year. So that's one thing. And the other was, I wonder if there would be a concern by providers that they don't have patch information. And so they're not going to be able to provide that next level of providing patches.
Yeah.
But I guess from my perspective, I think that would be, they're going to have that situation no matter what. And so for the authorities that can provide a patch, we give a recommendation of this is how you would provide a patch if you have it. And if they don't, they're in the same place that they were. All they can do is tell you that thing changed, but they really can't tell you how it changed. It doesn't seem any worse, I guess. For those who can provide the patch, it's better. For those who can't, it's at least no worse.
Yeah. You know, one interesting twist on this in terms of have I managed to maintain integrity in my content is that if I get a periodic baseline, I know that irrespective of what's happened previously, me re-ingesting the new baseline allows me to assert that I actually have my integrity maintained. The notion of an infinitely deep RDF patch doesn't allow me to periodically make that assertion without starting over and rerunning all of history. I guess the extreme there is version control systems, where if you're doing, in the old days with RCS, they did forward deltas. You had to start with the initial version of the document and apply all patches to get to the current one. And successive source code control systems abandoned that because of the number of patches over time you had to play, and flipped it around to doing reverse deltas where they maintain the current version of the document and you apply undos basically to turn it into older versions. And I just identified that I've been around for way too long, because I'm sure most of you have never heard of RCS, except for maybe John. This is sort of gray area where the specifications, I mean, where the operational semantics, if you will, begin to interplay with the denotational semantics of the specification.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Based on the conversation we've had today, what I think I would like to do is take the working document here and process it again and give examples of what it would be like to have the patches expressed using a relationship, a URL out to a relationship. See what that looks like. And that would allow us to have this sort of streamlined activity stream that's really just notifications, but with a means for those who can process to have this relationship that would let them go out and process. And I will also include some recommendations like the periodic wholesale replacement that allows, like an annual replacement, and then having an activity stream that exists for all patches since the last wholesale replacement. And I can put that in some text in the overview to describe that as a recommendation to maintain data integrity. Does that seem good to folks?
Yeah.
Okay, and the other thing I will do is I'm going to take another look at Getty to see if I can determine how they're doing their ordered collections, to see if I can start getting a sense of implementation recommendations that might take us beyond just a specification into like, well, how would you actually do this? What would that look like?
Sounds fine to me.
Sounds great.
All right, I think this is a great meeting today. I think we're really making some progress, and I like where we're going. I think this is going to turn out really nice. Thanks, everybody.
Talk to you later.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.